Hi there, my name is Cassidy. I'm the news editor of The Sun, and I'm here to interview Charlotte Andrew, who's running to be the association president. Hi Charlotte.
Hi.
Why do you want to be the president of the Students' Association?
I think I do a really good job. I think that's the first point. Like, you shouldn't run unless you think you can do a competent job, or not even just competent, but one that is consistently improving upon every previous candidate or every previous sabbatical's record. And I'm very passionate about ensuring that communication with the students and communicating their difficulties and their issues is done well and done consistently throughout the year. And that's a key part of the presidential role. But also, I've had an excellent, brilliant time at St Andrews. I've had a really positive experience, but I've also talked to people who have had areas in their time here that haven't been as good as they could have been, or haven't had the same experience that I have, and I want to be able to find out why and ensure that that doesn't happen, or at least happens a lot less.
What experience have you had during your time at St Andrews that you feel would prepare you for the role of president?
Okay, so I've been the debates president for a year. I've also in the last year been association alumni officer. I currently sit on the community council and on the I was elected from SSC to be the SSC senior officer, who then sits on the board of trustees. So I've already for a year sat on the governing body of the Students' Association. I spent a year on the SSC and then a year on the SSC and the SRC, so the two student council bodies. So I know the union well, and I particularly know I've worked with the university through the development office who conduct alumni relations, and I've also worked within debates in particular and expanding outreach and reaching different groups of people that wouldn't normally necessarily debate or feel comfortable talking to a large audience, and also managing, I don't want to say difficult people, but people who enjoy arguing and are very passionate about what they argue about. So I know I can communicate well, and I think I've demonstrated that, and I can manage different groups of people who are made up of different backgrounds as well.
What do you feel in the past year that if you were president you could have done better? Not even just something that Pat Martin, the current president, has done, but in something that within the whole Student Association that would have been better if you'd been president.
I think there are two key things that I'm really passionate about that I haven't seen happen this year as much as I would like. One of which is communicating with the current students what the SABs do day to day and how they can be held accountable. I know the SABs well, and I think they've done a good job this year, but I think there are areas that every year can be improved because no one is perfect. But I also think the students need to be told what the SABs are doing day to day. I think often SABs get elected and do their job, and a lot of students don't hear from them again unless it's in a weekly email that some students don't open, until they hear the Saints report card. So I think more of a direct communication between students and SABs, which can be done through videos every month, just very informal things showing what SABs do on a day-to-day basis, different graphics about the union. So I think communication about SAB's role and therefore how students can be represented and how they can access the union's opportunities. And a second thing that I think gets neglected is widening access, which is a key part of the president's role, but it's not one that is so obvious to the majority of students. So I think that's A, why it might be neglected, or B, why the work that is done isn't communicated well to students. So I think reaching out to students from different backgrounds with different interests, to the majority of undergraduates who are young and like to socialise consistently. I think there are groups that get neglected, and this year, not even this, like you say, not this year in particular, but previously, that hasn't been demonstrated as a key part of the president's role, and it is.
You've only got one opponent now, it's confirmed. You've also had a great deal of experience on SRC and other bodies and helping within the union. So what do you feel sets you apart from not just Annie, but from other candidates in the past and other other candidates for other positions? What is your unique selling point that would make you a great association president? Okay,
I think there's a few. One of which is that for the last year I've sat on community council, and a key part of the president's role is maintaining positive relations between the locals and the union. So I built up those relationships, and it's something that I can build on in the future. Secondly, I think being debates president is a really key selling point for me. I don't know of a previous president, or at least not a previous president in the past 4 or 5 years that has previously been a debates president, and I think there's key aspects of that would prepare you well for being president, from literally being very good at public speaking, or I wouldn't say I was very good, but like enjoying public speaking, to managing a group of people who, like I've already said, are argumentative and difficult occasionally, although they're lovely. And in general, I'd say that one of my key selling points is the fact that I have a proven record of achieving what I've promised, and I consistently make progress with the different remits that I've set myself, and also that I am very good at building up positive relations between people and proving that I can be professional and honest consistently.
One of the things, moving on to your manifesto and the things you outlined in that, one of the things you spoke about in terms of widening access is an outreach programme, for a volunteer outreach programme for students at the university now, to go back to the communities that they come from and encourage students to come to the Andrews, answer their questions and describe their own experience. Do you think students would take that up? Do you think students would do it? I
think so. I think if it had been offered to me, I would have. And I don't think I'm unique in that point at all. We already have an ambassador scheme that is very successful and does do work around, obviously, you know, we see the open days, there's different schemes that go on across Scotland, and students volunteer for that. But I want to extend that. So I imagine that the same students who volunteer to do the current ambassador scheme and the work across Scotland would volunteer to go back home and help there. And I also think that the convenience of being able to help simply by going to a local school means that there would be an even greater uptake. Additionally, we'd have training from KPOD in leadership skills and in how to run different workshops. So there would be talks, there would be CV workshops. It can be to a group or one-to-one based on what the school asks the student offering their help to do. And that would also be registered in the volunteering portal, which the number of hours that you volunteered during your time at St Andrews gets put on your transcript. So I think there's various different motivations for students to get involved there, and I definitely think that would be taken up by a large proportion of them.
In terms of actually widening access, and you put emphasis on this in your manifesto, is the idea of getting students who come from low-income background or low-income areas in particular to take up in the volunteer scheme and go back and sort of try and improve St Andrews' reputation there, where sometimes students don't consider St Andrews as a university. Do you think this might put too much pressure on students from low-income backgrounds? No, because I'm not going to directly focus the scheme, I'm not going to try and find those students and directly say to them, you should be doing this. It will be a programme that's open to all, but I'm very aware, given my background, that the kind of student who might come from either a low-income background or be a first-generation student like I am, is more likely to understand exactly why having a student go back and explain to students studying GCSEs or equivalent qualifications exactly why going to university at all is a really positive experience, and why they should perhaps break outside the barriers that their particular community might currently have to that, and also explain to them how they can overcome some of the obstacles that are there, especially with St Andrews, where there is hidden costs and it is notoriously expensive. I think having that very personal contact makes a huge difference to a potential student, and therefore I think it's very worthwhile. Any students from low-income backgrounds who want to get involved but think there might be a difficulty, that the union has funds. I would be more than happy to say I'd be able to allocate a grant for expenses, but the point is that it's local, so hopefully it wouldn't be too much of a difficulty, and also hopefully it would be students going back to schools that they have a connection to, because I think that also adds something. If you say, look, I've come from this community, it might not be the norm for you to apply to either university or to St Andrews, but I managed it and I'm really enjoying it. I think that makes a massive difference. One of the next things you talk about in your manifesto is the idea of expanding the student voice on national issues on a national level, and you emphasise your experience as head of the debating society and how this would help you to do this. And you do talk about several issues such as immigration, talk about other things that students have been about, like fees and the cutting of the maintenance grants. But one thing I was concerned about in the manifesto is that there weren't really many, I didn't feel there were many concrete proposals of how we express this national voice of students. How would you do that as president?
So firstly, you reach out to other sabbatical candidates, sabbaticals at other universities. So obviously, as soon as I was elected, I would be elected, and the other sabbaticals in other universities had their elections, I'd reach out and talk to them, and we'd have a meeting, whether it be by conference call or in person, and discuss how to go about it. I think there are several ways you can do it, and also I'm sure that there are ways that I don't know of that, you know, would benefit from university connections. But it would be, my proposed idea would be to make joint statements to the press, to national newspapers, and try and make a stance as, not just as St Andrews, the comparatively small university in the corner of Scotland, but as Scottish universities and Scottish institutions as a whole. And I think that could make a huge impact. I also think, like, a lot of these policies just deserve our attention. We're students, we should care about students, and I think we do, but we don't necessarily take a loud enough stance on it. And when I say loud, it's not necessarily to be controversial for being controversial's sake. It's to stand up for people that deserve recognition, deserve some attention.
So you've spoken there about how do you maybe feel then St Andrews should become, this association become more of an activist association, because our association is generally seen, and the university in general, is very non-politically active. We don't, you know, get, our societies are not the most active ones. We don't get organised big protests generally. We're not involved in massive student movements like other universities. Do you feel that maybe St Andrews should be a bit more activist when it comes to political issues?
I think we should be more active. I don't think activist is the right word. And it would also completely depend on what the students want and what the Student Representative Council thought was appropriate. So it wouldn't be me going on some trailblazing sort of like path trying to take a stand on every issue that there is. It's very much what the students care about, and making sure that we have that discussion. And I think that's a key part of what SRC should be used to do. We shouldn't be passing on that council, we shouldn't be passing sort of small legislative changes to student society constitutions all the time. It should be talking about representative issues that actually affect our students on a day-to-day basis. So I wouldn't want our union to be activist unless students demonstrated a clear will to be. But I think there are issues like the graduate salary threshold for non-EU graduates that we should be saying something about, because that does affect a large proportion of our student population, and it does put students off and make them feel slightly unwelcome when they shouldn't be.
Is there anything, I mean, you've spoken about you personally as association president, you work with sabbatical officers at other universities, but what would you do to sort of incorporate more student voice of St Andrews practically? Because you've said it's important, but what sort of specific ideas do you think you have to get students in St Andrews involved in issues like the EU graduate threshold, non-EU students rather? Okay,
so I think part of it would be making, so like I already referenced, the Student Representative Council take more of an active stance. So have members of that council, not as individuals, but as a member of the council, circulate the petitions that often go around St Andrews on these key issues, not on every issue that comes up, but on big issues that do matter to a lot of students. And take the lead on it. So like we've seen with the current divestment petition, I'd make sure that students would take up a cause, and if there's significant demonstration of interest and of passion about it, then I think that's enough for us to feel like we should make our voices heard. It's difficult to make a student population passionate about something that they might not otherwise be passionate about, but that's the point, is we only take the causes and we only take a stance when there's something that does, you know, cause people to really care.
You've spoken about, especially about working with other universities, especially in Scotland. You spoke about working with other sabbatical officers, but like earlier in the year, the NUS referendum, whether or not to join the NUS, it was cancelled simply because of lack of student interest. And when it actually was held in 2012, 4 years ago, it was the decision to affiliate with the NUS was rejected 75% to 25%. So haven't the students at Andrews sort of said, we don't want to work with other universities?
No, I think they said we don't really care about joining the NUS. I think there's a difference. I think that in general, students would enjoy knowing that Scottish institutions are working together on issues, and that universities and student unions are looking out for their best interests, not only while students are at university, but also afterwards. I don't think students have rejected the notion of working together across the entirety of Scotland. I just think they didn't particularly have too much passion in the NUS issue.
In the next part of your manifesto, you speak a lot about reaching out to different groups of students who traditionally are neglected by the university, such as international students, students from racial minorities, students from mature students, students from children, students with disabilities, and all these many different groups. But earlier in the year, obviously, you were involved in SRC reform, quite controversial at the time. The exact proposal was to remove the 9 members for such as gender equality and racial equality from the SRC, not abolish the positions, but simply remove them from the SRC. You speak a lot about this in your manifesto about reaching out to these students, but wouldn't those proposals do the opposite? Wouldn't they give less of a voice to those students?
Okay. The idea with the reform, so there were 3 phases to the reform that the senior officers, which was Annie and myself, and Zara as the association chair, were asked to look into by the sabbatical officers. And obviously SRC reform comes under the DIREP's remit, so it was looked over by Joe. The first 2 phases went through really well and weren't controversial at all. They went through unanimously. The 3rd section was always going to cause a bit more of a controversy. And we knew that it was unlikely when you're affecting someone's positions and they're holding a position, they're voting on it, that it would not necessarily go down well regardless of what you proposed. So the idea there was not to reduce representation, but was to suggest a way to improve SRC significantly. So the problem that we saw, and we had a lot of discussion within the SRC and outside the SRC with all the members, and they were all involved, and we asked all of them their opinions, was that the way SRC functioned this year and previously, until these changes have been put in place, the first 2 phases rather than the 3rd phase, was not good enough. It was somewhat lethargic because there's so many people round a table, and because you do have a change every year. Obviously, as elections happen every year, it doesn't feel like you're being very productive whilst you're in the council meetings. The subcommittees outside of the council meetings do a lot, and they make a huge amount of change. So when we proposed that the members for positions be moved or solely sit on equal opportunities, it wasn't to reduce representation, and it wasn't an attempt in any way to reduce the importance of that. It was to make the subcommittees feel like they're making more of a difference, because every time, I think when you're on a smaller committee, people feel a little bit more comfortable raising their voices and bringing up the big issues, because they know they're not going to be in that room for 3 hours because there's a small amount of people there. It wasn't about reducing representation. I think everyone involved realised that wasn't really the case. It was about making sure the students were served in a better fashion, because the SRC as it was not functioning particularly well, and we knew that a big change would need to happen. So that's what we proposed. We knew really whilst we proposed it that it probably was unlikely to go through, and therefore the idea was more to make other people on the committee or on the council think about how they were going to how it could work better. So I realise this is a really long answer, I'm sorry. following our proposal, which we knew was controversial and likely to go through, and which I eventually voted for the amendment, which didn't move the members for. There were lots of different changes proposed by lots of different people on councils, and that's the kind of change that I much prefer. It would be something a bit more organic that doesn't just come from 1 or 2 people. And for me, tabling that proposal, I didn't think it would ever go through. It was more about making people feel a bit more passionate about the structure of the SRC, which is really difficult to do. So we thought the way I was thinking of it, like, if it's controversial, it means people will become impassioned and want to talk about it, rather than just be like, it's SRC reform, it's the structure of the councils, who cares? But it did mean, like, we had loads of changes. Like, we've changed a few positions, Equal Ops have brought in amendments to their constitution, everything works a lot more efficiently now, and that's exactly what we were aiming for.
So, as Association President, would you still like to see some measure of SRC reform? Maybe not the exact proposals that you suggested earlier in the year, but another proposal to help expand reform the SRC. I wouldn't rule it out, but not in my time here, because we did make big changes, and as far as I was concerned, those big changes that we passed in the first 2 phases were enough. SRC is only meeting 5 times, or at least 5 times next year, and the intention was to make it more of a creative process. So there'll be brainstorming sessions, there'll be presentations from heads of subcommittees as to what the projects that they're doing, rather than tabling motions about, we're going to change this section of the Constitution. So I think they're big enough changes to not need anything additional unless other students bring them to the table. I would not suggest any more SRC reform in this year, because we have passed big changes and we need to see how they work for a year. One of the things that was spoke about during the debate on those reforms, I was there obviously, and earlier this year. Obviously, you spoke about how you wanted it to be a collaborative process, but some people on the council expressed concerns that it wasn't. They expressed concerns that it had sort of been done behind the scenes without talking to people as much as they could have done. Some people got upset. Some people did not feel that they had been consulted properly, and that they felt that people did things behind other people's backs to try and advance agendas, something like that.
Okay.
And I suppose it goes to the sort of the wider concern people have about sort of these cliques within the union, and there's only certain people who just have all the union jobs, and then they eventually run for SAB jobs.
Yeah.
Do you feel that that's a concern that people would have with your presidency? There's just another sort of
not about me, I don't think, because so the way that we went about the SRC reform was we were asked by the SABs to do it. We talked to as many members of council as possible, and sometimes, yes, they disagreed with what we were proposing, but the point was that we don't make a proposal that everybody is happy with before you come to councils, because councils are minuted for a reason, so students can read the minutes, or the same, or other newspapers can sit in and report on it. My motivation was, as much as we did talk to everyone, we possibly, almost everybody, and there was no reason we didn't, talk to certain people. It's just there's 30 people, and we also have a degree to do. There's only so much you can do. Was to make sure that we had that discussion in the room. I don't think that it's okay to ask each person individually and be like, here's my proposal, what do you think? Because they often need to bounce off other people, need to hear what other people have said, and also that makes it more of a back channel thing. That makes it more of a clique. Yeah. It's far better to be like, look, a couple of us have had an idea, we've chatted to a few of you, but we want to see what everybody thinks in a very open fashion. That meant that then amendments got made, then other people contributed to it. We had a discussion about what we thought the entire purpose of the SRC should be, and it was really, really productive. But having talked to the people that were upset afterwards, I think they understand where I'm coming from, in that A, we've sorted out that they're no longer upset, and B, they understood that the point was bringing it to the table in order for everybody to be involved in the process, and to make sure that that process is held accountable by you and the rest of the press. Because, as I said, if the discussions are had outside that room, that's the problem. That's when it becomes an issue. You can't bring a perfect motion every time, and you shouldn't, because it's not up to you to decide what passes. It's up to the entire room.
Moving on to accommodation, which is obviously a big part of the association president's job, because it's a big concern of students. One of the things you've said is that you want to help expand the portfolio of the university managed accommodation, which includes the sort of flats and houses around town that university owns and lets out to students at sort of cheaper rates and better leases than most other places in town. How do you help to expand that portfolio? What ideas do you have to expand it? So first of all, I've talked to RBS and Ben Stewart, who's director of RBS, about this. That's the residential business services.
Yes, sorry. And he thinks that it's difficult, but it's a long-term solution. So what you need to do, so obviously this is about having properties that are owned by landlords managed by the university. So if a student has a problem with the washing machine, they call a university department rather than a private landlord who could probably get away with not fixing it for 5-6 days, whereas the university will do it that day or the next. It improves the efficiency of it. It means students are catered to better. It requires a publicity campaign to convince landlords that this is a positive thing for them. So that would be run between the RBS and the Students' Union. There'd be talks, to invite landlords and landlords in to explain to them what it entails, and also using examples of current university-managed accommodation to convince people that it means you will always get students who are well behaved because they've been vetted by the university, well behaved and treat the property correctly, and also that you get all the all the problems and stresses of having a student message you at 2 a.m. to say, our electricity has gone out, or we need a plumber. It means the university takes that over. So it means a publicity campaign of reaching out to landlords, that would be the initial stage. But it's also something that very much would happen in collaboration with RBS, with the university. So it would be an extended process. But I think students aren't stupid in that accommodation is a serious problem here. It won't be solved in 1 year. It won't be solved overnight. This is something that will take a while, but it's very realistic. And I'd rather be honest and say that I'm not going to solve the accommodation crisis like that, because it won't happen. But this is one of the concrete ways that over a period of years, we can make a serious difference to how students are treated within town, because you also won't have landlords treating students badly with this scheme, but also means that the university has more independence from town residents when it comes to making sure accommodation is there for students and readily available.
On the issue of private accommodation, private accommodation owned by letting agents and landlords and not managed by a university, I looked through your proposals in your manifesto. Two of the main things that I saw were the sort of ensuring that the position of accommodation advocate is kept on, which has been a really important position this year, and also expanding more talks on accommodation, because we have a lot of talks on accommodation held organised by the accommodation advocate and the accommodation officer. There wasn't, to my mind, when I was reading it, there wasn't a lot more than that than those two specific things. There weren't really any big ideas to help students with private accommodation. Is there anything more you think you could do to help students who are having problems like private landlords and letting agents that the university maybe can't solve because they're not managing?
Okay, so I think there are several problems with how private accommodation in this town works. And I think there are already several ways that we can tackle that are currently being pursued. And so ensuring that they continue is really important. We have problems with how much rent costs. We have problems with how students access letting agencies and landlords and how early that happens, and the really difficult process of finding accommodation. And we have problems with how landlords treat students. We also, lastly, but by no means least important, have problems with the relationships between students and the town residents in general, not just between locals. I think these are already being tackled in various ways. I think reducing rent, again, like I said, is a long-term problem, and university managed accommodation, ensuring that we have positive relationships with 5 councils so we can talk about the HMO ban, which I know we'll chat about later, will help, but I think they're long-term solutions. So I don't think price will change significantly very soon. I think the way students are treated by landlords is something that, again, is difficult to change, but we already have that outlet in that the accommodation advocate is there for students to talk to if they have a problem with a landlord, and so the accommodation advocate gives them advice on how legally they can go about preventing the landlord from treating them in a bad way. But there's also a list with the accommodation advocate of landlords that have signed up to say that they behave positively and they're good to students, and they can be brought up on that or taken out of that agreement, and that can be done publicly if necessary. I think the whole system of how students, like the process of finding accommodation, which is horrendous, it is no fun for anybody. I think that's how we solve that through accommodation talks. Now, we do already have those, but we don't have them between letting agencies, landlords and students. We don't currently have that, and I think that would be a positive way to ensure that the relationships are built from the very get-go, and mean that they're not seen as other and not seen as us versus them. I think there was one other issue that I raised. But so those are the two key new things that I would want to make sure happen. But it does, my manifesto doesn't necessarily include everything that's already happening. So it would be making sure that those areas are continued and improved. But those are the two things that I think need to be addressed now.
Moving on to the issue of hall accommodation in student halls, we just saw this morning that there was a major initiative of the university's new build plan worth £70 million and affecting various different halls. One of the things it will affect is that Albany Park will be either be fully or partially demolished starting in June 2017. What I wanted to ask you about was, obviously Albany Park is the cheapest hall and helps cater to a variety of students from low income backgrounds who really can't afford many other places in town. I know many people that have stayed the whole 4 years in Albany simply due to the financial costs of it. So how do you think, as president, you'd help these poor students who are inevitably going to be disadvantaged by the fact that Albany will be partially closing, at least?
I think what we do is look into how the accommodation bursaries are allocated and make sure those are people who are prioritised, and that the equivalent amount of money or the amount that they would have been charged for Albany is how much they're charged for any other halls. I think if they would have qualified for Albany, that's how they should be treated in any halls. I think this is always a very sensitive issue when you're talking about someone's sort of economic background. So it does require a sensitive approach. But accommodation bursaries, even especially with my contacts with alumni in the development office, who, like I said, conduct alumni relations with alumni through the university, that could be a major campaign for them of ensuring that students don't get turned away from St Andrews or don't have to turn the university down because of how much accommodation costs, because that is a serious issue. So accommodation bursaries, a potential alumni effort, and treating it with sensitivity. You
spoke there about the idea of students being treated, if they qualify for Albany Park, being treated like that in any other hall. So is that the idea of students would, if they were staying, in sort of in Sally's or Andrew Melville, they would, get the price at a reduced rate because they would qualify for Albany in a normal situation?
This again depends on talks that happen with RBS, but I would advocate either that, or ensuring that they have accommodation bursaries that ensure that financially is the same way. So you'd have enough of a bursary to only have to pay what you would have paid at Albany anyway.
Do you think the university should be investing more in accommodation bursaries and investing more in helping students from poorer income backgrounds?
Yes, but I also don't think it's just accommodation bursaries. I think halls in general cost too much. I know of several friends when I was applying to St Andrews who looked at the potential costs of halls and were put off from St Andrews just because they could be paying between £6,000 and £8,000 a year and wouldn't have a choice in the matter. They might not have qualified for Albany, but they definitely couldn't afford that amount. And I was lucky in that I didn't have to pay £6,000 to £8,000. I think in general that needs to be looked at, and an attempt to either reduce or justify why it costs so much more than other university accommodation is put out there to students, because I think that puts some prospective students off without them even knowing how much of a bursary they could have or whether they can access accommodation bursaries.
So what you spoke about, the idea of people there not knowing whether or not they qualify for bursaries or how much of a bursary they could get. How would you help students, become more aware of bursaries that they might qualify for?
I think, again, sensitive topic. I think that gets included in the very first email you receive from St Andrews, or in is one of the very first things at the top of a page when you click onto our website to say that you're a prospective student. It needs to be far higher up the ranking of important things for students. I'm aware it's not the most relevant thing to the majority of students here, but especially as the university is looking to A, expand student population, and B, expand the amount of international students you have here. I think making sure that a demographic that is already neglected is looked after particularly well, or looked out for particularly well, is really important. So there's several small ways to make students more aware of the opportunities that we have, because we do have a lot. There's a lot on offer in St Andrews, and it's making sure students know that that's there and that there are people there to help them. That's important.
You spoke about the HMO ban a bit earlier, and you spoke about it quite a bit in your manifesto about how you would like to see it repealed. You say it's been a bad idea and how it's affected students badly. So I guess what my question is, the HMO ban has been a big thing for ages. Students in general do not like it. No one's really in favour of it.
No.
So why do you think you would be successful where others have failed to fight the ban?
First of all, there's a review coming up this year from Fife Council. So there's the results of 2 studies should come out and saying how successful it's been in achieving the aims of Fife Council, which the idea was, although I think it's been unsuccessful, to ensure that there is a cohesive amount of students and locals who live here permanently, living in town, and make sure it's not just a student-dominated town. I think instead you now have accommodation which could have housed 3, 4, 5 people, have 2 students in it, paying much more rent than they previously would have done. I don't think it's achieved the aims the council set out to achieve. But this is not new information for them. It's just making sure that they have the studies that back up that. And I also think that this is an area that was tackled at the time of the HMO ban being put in place, and the student union hasn't been vocal enough about it in protesting how unjust it is. I don't want to make it an us versus them issue, because I completely understand why local residents wouldn't want a student-dominated town. I just think it's exacerbated the problem that already existed, and now it's even more so a student-dominated town, and one that actually has higher rents than previously.
So going on from that, about the idea of relations between the town and gown students and the permanent residents who live here, what do you think you could do as president to improve those relations? Or do you think people in town have been unfair on students? Do you think students have been unfair on people in town? What do you think?
Always a contentious issue, and having sat on community council, I'm aware of how contentious it can be, but I'm also very aware of how well-intentioned both sides are. Neither side thinks, neither the locals think that the students in general are awful people, and the students don't think the townspeople in general are awful people. It's very much, each group knows that there are nuances to the situation. I think this year on community council there are a lot more students that sit on it than has previously been the case. It's usually just been the association community relations officer and the president. So I think trying to maintain student interest in community engagement is a good thing. I'm also very well aware that a lot of the problems are based around reason, based around the amount of rubbish on the streets by students and local businesses, based around noise, and based around drinking. And I think if the student union made more of a statement to community council saying, look, this is how we're tackling the issue, we do take your concerns seriously, I think that would assuage a lot of town residents' problems, as long as they know that there is action being taken and that we're taking the problems that they've raised seriously. I think that in itself will improve relations. Because it's just communication, it's just demonstrating that we're doing something and we do care. That's the key issue there.
One of the other things you spoke about is international students. It's a big part of your manifesto. So obviously students, there's a lot of international students at St Andrews, lots more so than many other universities. One of the things you spoke about was helping international students with fees, as they often have higher fees than, well, Scottish students don't pay fees, EU students don't pay fees, but international students often have higher fees than, say, someone from England. So what would you do, what concretely would you do to help these students with fees?
So reduce the amount that they increase each year. Like I said in my manifesto, I don't think, as much as I'd ask for this to happen, I don't think it's realistic to expect the university to not increase tuition fees. They're just unlikely to do that. There's no point me promising something that I don't think will happen. I'd much rather be honest with students. But there is a significant increase year on year, and I think decreasing the amount that happens, as convoluted as that sounds, would make a difference, and making it clear to students that there is a good reason why those tuition fees are being raised, and it's not just so that their money is being poured into the university because the university can take it. So decreasing that, and trying to link the amount tuition fees are to the currency rate within a range, within a reasonable range. Because I know of students who've had to drop out from university because their home currency has changed so significantly that they can no longer afford tuition fees, which is horrendous. Like, you're good enough to come to St Andrews, you've worked hard, you've got midway through your degree or even a year through your degree, and you've had to drop out because of money and because of something that you had no influence over. And I think the university should be more flexible with that and more ready to accept that there are some situations that need to be taken into account.
Isn't that just an argument against fees in general? Like the idea that if you're a student that's good enough to come to St Andrews, good enough to make it through your career, but you can't afford the fees, isn't that just sort of an argument against the whole idea of fees?
Well, like I say, I like to be honest and reasonable, and that's, abolishing fees is never going to happen. I understand why we're charged some, and obviously I have to pay £9,000 while my Scottish friends don't have to pay anything and the EU friends don't have to pay anything. I don't think universities would be able to function if people didn't pay fees. I don't think it's realistic to suggest that we shouldn't charge fees, and my argument isn't that we should abolish fees, it's that we should take into account that sometimes there are issues, especially when the fees aren't at a fixed rate. I'd love it if no one had to pay fees, but we wouldn't have a good university if we didn't pay fees, if we didn't all pay fees.
Another issue on the issue of international students that you've spoken about is the idea of expanding platforms for other cultures. So I wonder if you want to just run me through your ideas for alternative platforms for other cultures.
Okay, so there's a platform called Weibo, which is often used by the Asian community that I had never heard of until this year, but apparently is very extensively used, and that's not something that the Student Association uses. So I think that's one communication platform that we should be taking advantage of, because we do have a significant proportion of our student population from a different international background, and we should be catering to their needs and their preferences. That's what we're here for. That's what the Students Association is here to do. It's to ensure that all students are catered to. So that, on a communication platform, that's one specific example that is useful. But in other areas, there are countless different cultures that I don't know enough about right now that I want to have focus groups with, working with the DOREP and working with the member for racial equality, in order to ensure that any problem they have with how the Student Association functions, or even how the university functions, because we can relate that back. And that's a key part of what my role would be, is communicating students' problems to the university and being that point of contact. Is having focus groups with people who are interested in coming to the Students' Union, have a particular problem, and trying to deal with that regularly. Again, that relies on students being engaged, but I do think that there are a significant number of people who take issue with some of the current systems that we have, or current approaches that the Student Union has, and I think that they'd probably like a voice and like a more accessible way of making that voice heard.
One of the other proposals you've outlined in your manifesto for helping international students and students from other cultures is the idea of a buddy system. Now again, this is something I ask about whether you think students would genuinely take this up. Would they genuinely want, because it's a bit of a high school thing, isn't it? I mean, the idea that you have a buddy who you help out and make sure they know everything. I mean, do you think it would work?
So probably first, the title buddy might be a bad one, because I think that probably does make it sound a bit high schoolish. We can find a different title for it. But secondly, I think that's probably indicative of us coming from the same culture. I think if we'd come from a completely different country that has a completely different way of seeing things, I think we'd probably appreciate the idea that someone is there to look out for you and recognise that it's not just coming to university that's difficult, it's coming to university in a completely different culture, culture and country that's difficult too. And having talked to students from different countries, different cultures, different religions and with different languages about this idea, they seem to be quite interested in it. So again, it does depend on students being engaged, but I think that that means that we should offer the service and see whether they are. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't try. And I do think that if it does work, which I would dedicate a lot of time to making sure it does work, then it's well worth the effort. And even if it makes a significant difference to a few students, I think that's more than enough to make sure that they're happy and comfortable at St Andrews, rather than feeling slightly isolated or neglected by their students' association that is supposedly meant to represent them.
The last sort of point in your manifesto is about the environment, and you spoke about the importance of making sure St Andrews is a green university and of making sure that St Andrews is, helping to fight climate change. So what kind of specific proposals do you have to help St Andrews do that, or increase our follow through the work that's already going on?
So first of all, our university is in general really great for the environment. It is in several ways way ahead of the curve from the majority of other universities. We were, I think, the first or one of the first to introduce the sustainable investment policy, I think in 2008, if I'm right. And we, there's the Garbridge project, the wind farm project. There's lots of ways in which the university is trying very hard, and I think that that shouldn't be ignored. But the key thing that I see as a problem right now is the fact that there's still just over £1 million invested in companies that work with fossil fuels and fossil fuel extraction, and that goes against the sustainable investment policy that we have. It goes against a lot of what the students stand for, and I think divesting from those funds is important. Not only because that helps the environment and improves reduces the amount of money that's in fossil fuel research and extraction in general, but also to make sure that the university doesn't appear hypocritical, and that should be done over a couple of years. I think the current petition that's going around suggests 3 years, but I also think the university should issue another statement saying how committed they are to a positive environmental policy, because we do a lot, and we do a lot more than other universities, but by having that large pot of cash in the wrong place, it somewhat jeopardizes the claim that we do a lot, and we need to restate that and ensure that the university considers it to be important.
As a sort of final couple summing up things, one of the things I wanted to ask was, can you name me sort of one good thing from the past year that, in the whole association, that you would like to see more of as association president, and one bad thing that you think could be improved upon?
So one good thing, I think things like they came out today, the graphics about what the SABs were doing and what they've achieved in their year. I think more images and graphics about what the SABs are up to is really important. Yeah, I think that's probably the answer to the first part. I think the second part, problems like calling the club pull. Whether you agree with it or not, it caused some people to be uncomfortable, and that's something we should be avoiding. And I think perhaps that required a large amount of people to be consulted about the name of that club. I think that's something where the issue should have been talked about at SRC rather than just amongst a SAB team. And that's, again, an issue where I think SABs need to be held slightly more accountable. Like in my manifesto, I mentioned SAB question times. I want at least one per semester so students can directly ask SABs, because a lot of students don't know who they are, don't know where to find them, don't know what they do. if there's a large event that's well advertised where people can face-to-face interact with sabbatical officers, I think that makes them seem more human and approachable, but also means SABs maybe think about decisions in a slightly different way.
What would you like your legacy to be as association president?
My legacy, I would like to be remembered as someone who was honest and realistic with the aims. I'm never going to promise something that I don't think is possible to achieve. Someone who is professional but also compassionate and has good fun. I think being realistic is key, but I also think trying to take a stance on key issues is really important, and helping students or reaching out to students that need that help is also really key. I think that's what we're here for. We're paid to do a job, and that's representing students. That's not just representing the majority of students that you interact with day to day. It's reaching out to those people that might not otherwise interact with you and might not otherwise feel like they're being represented or being looked after.
Finally, just is there anything else that you feel that I haven't covered that you feel students should know about why they should vote for you as association president?
Probably not that we haven't already covered, just that I think I do a good job. I consistently achieve the goals that I've set in my previous positions. I very much enjoy doing that, and I enjoy helping students out and ensuring that their experience of St Andrews is as positive as mine has been. Yeah, I think that's it.
Thank you for speaking to us, Charlotte.
Thank you.
Thank you everyone for watching. Make sure to check out the rest of our interviews at the same website or our YouTube channel. Do you think visibility would be the main thing you'd like to improve on as association president?
In terms of the entire SAB team, absolutely. In terms of just as president, there are things like you have a manifesto. I think it's less of an issue of improving and more of an issue of recognizing the things that we've done really well, recognizing the things that will continue to go really well because we've put those processes in place, and allowing ourselves to shift our focus to some new and really exciting projects.